This is episode number 110 of the Guns Magazine podcast. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. However, before we get started, I would like to welcome an old friend aboard who is a new sponsor for the Guns Magazine podcast, Luth-AR. Luth-AR is the home of NBA buttstocks, which are affordable, lightweight, fully adjustable buttstocks for AR-15 fixed and collapsible rifles. But that's not all. Luth-AR is your one-stop shop for build kits, replacement parts, and custom accessories, including the chubby grip, palm handguards, oversized switch safety, and paddle bolt catch. Luth-AR is proudly made in the USA, and with 4 decades of experience, will continue their mission of innovate to dominate with high-quality products for your ARs. Find out more at luthar.com, and we'll have a link in the show notes. Today, I got our special assignments editor, Roy Huntington, to talk about a subject that just fascinates me: hardware store guns. In the early part of the 20th century, a significant portion of the guns in America were sold through hardware and chain stores. Many of the bigger companies, such as Sears and Western Auto, even had their own brand imprints, though the guns were made by other popular manufacturers such as Marlin, Savage, and Winchester. Nobody makes them anymore, but you can still find these guns on the rack at many gun shops and a whole lot of closets, ancient pickup trucks, and old barns. Now let's talk to Roy Huntington about his experiences with hardware store guns. Well, good afternoon, Roy.
Howdy, sir. Happy to be here.
Well, it's one of those episodes where I just had to hit the button. We were having so much fun talking, and I said, wait, this is all stuff we need to be recording and sharing with our friends. So today we're going to talk about, I think, a very fascinating topic, and that is what I call hardware store guns. And those of you of a certain age or older remember that every hardware store in America had a gun counter, and they would sell all kinds of guns. But the interesting thing is they often sold their own personal brand. And those personal brands were typically made by one of the big manufacturers. And it's pretty fascinating. I've got, it's a Montgomery Ward, I believe, that's actually a Marlin Model 55. That was my first shotgun. And I thought, you know, Christmas is coming and a lot of folks will be getting Grandpa's old shotgun out of the closet as a gift. So Roy and I will talk about hardware store shotguns. So, Roy, have you ever had a hardware store shotgun?
Yes. And
that's a loaded question.
They have been the bane of my existence as a hobby gunsmith sometimes. Because the conversation usually goes, you know, I've got this really cool old shotgun that I got from my grandfather, and I think it's worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
Could you look at it? Because it's, and then fill in the blank, missing both hammers, has a cracked forend, the barrel's bent, and the buttstock is worm-eaten.
Yeah.
You know? And invariably they would bring it out and hand it to me with great reverence, which I understand that, except I would look at it and realize, you know, it said like, you know, Bill Williams Field Shotgun Incorporated.
Yeah.
you know? And invariably it was a hardware store shotgun that was probably sold for $5 in 1910. And a lot of times they were brought in from Europe, and a lot of Belgian guns, and they were pretty cheap. Yeah. And so, you know, these hardware stores would have them branded, and Brent's Hardware Shotguns Incorporated.
Well, I found a great website that you can cross-reference some of these, and I was stunned because, of course, we all know Ted Williams from Sears, and I'm thinking it's escaping me. I'll just go down this list. So Belknap Hardware, which was big in the South. I think they're nationwide now. Savage and Stevens made guns for them. Coast to Coast, which I think is a hardware store. Firestone. Firestone had Marlin, looks like rifles here. And then you had, of course, Glenfield.
Western Auto. Remember
Western Auto and Hiawatha. I don't know who made. I mean, Stevens made the Hiawatha, but I don't know who sold them. And of course, JCPenney had their own brand name, JCPenney guns that were Marlin, Glenfield, even some high standards here, and Savage. Kmart, of course, they had both Kmart and the Kresge, and just a few of those. There was Boito. I'm not familiar with that one myself. Looking down through here, it's just Oklahoma Tire and Supply. Glenfield and Marlin made their guns, and here's J.C. Higgins. They've got Savages and Marlins and high standards, and even, believe it or not, Seikos, Brownings, and Mausers from FN. So it says they sold a barreled action. So, and the list goes on and 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 on, all the way down to Western Field, which I believe was Montgomery Ward. Am I not correct there?
I think you're right. I remember as a kid, say 12 years old or so. I mean, what stores did you shop at? Sears, Montgomery Ward, JCPenney, and Kresge. And I remember whenever I was roped into going to the store with my parents, the first thing I did was make a beeline to the gun department.
Exactly.
And, and it's funny in retrospect, nobody even cared or noticed. In other words, if guns in JCPenney's, I remember in about 1982, I went to the JCPenney's in Fashion Valley, San Diego, the like fancy schmancy mall down there with a Nordstrom's and things like that. But I went into JCPenney's because they had surplus Garands that they were selling. Barrels of them, and we cherry picked through and we bought. They were $99. Yeah, and of course now today everyone would be mortified.
Well, I don't know the historical timeline here, but gun stores really only became, correct me if I'm wrong, a thing probably post World War II in the 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s. There really weren't a lot of gun shops except maybe in large metropolitan areas. If you needed a gun, you either ordered it from Sears or you went down to a local hardware store.
Pretty much, and the kind of pawn and gun stores, most of the gun stores, think John Browning. In other words, there were small companies that made guns. And so you could go to their retail establishment and buy one of their guns if you wanted to, but that wasn't real common, and you're right. And well, because every ma and pa general store in every town sold guns.
Yep.
And so think of those Old West movies you've seen where John Wayne saunters into the dry goods store and up to the curved glass counter and, buys a box of 45 Colt ammunition, and to go with his bacon and his, and his new hat.
Well, I'm reminded of the film The Highwayman, which, was the finale of Bonnie and Clyde. And the guys, the famous Texas Rangers escaping me, who was actually working for the Texas Bureau of Prisons. And I know all of our listeners are screaming.
Frank Hamer.
Frank Hamer, yeah.
Yeah.
And the scene in that movie where he goes into a local hardware store and he buys a BAR and I think he buys a Thompson and all that. It wasn't quite that way, but yes, you did go to the local hardware store and buy what you could buy.
And I miss those days. I think one of the real lessons, though, for people, and I think one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about this was the fact that you have to pay attention to that old gun that you see behind the counter at the gun store, because just when you pick it up and it says Ted Williams on it, you can't immediately think, well, what's this?
Yeah.
Or if it says, Glenfield, or it says J.C. Higgins or something like that, I think people immediately discount them and think, oh, this is just some, piece of garbage gun.
Yeah.
And that's not the case at all. I have a very beautiful Winchester over and under shotgun from the 60s that says Ted Williams on it. And, I knew when I looked at it, I said, oh no, that's a Winchester, Well,
I didn't remember this, but looking, Ted Williams, marked the Ted Williams model M73 was actually a Winchester model 70. And I knew the Ted Williams 100 was a Winchester model 94, and I wanted one. I wore out the Sears catalog as a small child, because when I became a mountain man in Alaska, I was going to have me a Ted Williams 100, the Winchester Model 94.
And there wasn't anything wrong with that in those days. I mean, it was just the fact that it was a Ted Williams. We didn't care. I didn't care. Like we knew it was a Winchester, so what the heck?
Well, I think it's funny what you said, that I think you're absolutely right. I've had the same experience. Hey, I found this shotgun in my grandpa's closet, and I think it's worth a lot of money. Well, it could be, but probably not. And when you tell them it's worth like $125, they're just crestfallen because that was grandpa's shotgun. So in real dollars, it's not worth much of nothing, but obviously to them, it's priceless, but that's a hard reality for them to suddenly be confronted with.
Well, I always try to get them refocused on the family history and and I tell them, I'll put some WD-40 on it and wipe it off and hang it up above the fireplace. I think people tend to forget just how many of these guns there were too.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if we're just going to talk about side-by-side shotguns, I mean, in the millions, of these $5 hardware store shotguns. And I think they were almost more disposable commodities than anything. These were not bought because they were beautiful, fine,
they were
firearms.
Yeah.
They were just tool. Yeah. And so this $5 hardware store 16 gauge, rabbit ear hammer shotgun was bought by a farmer that he then threw it in the back of his pickup truck, and he, kept it in the barn. And, that's why they're all in the state that they're in now. I don't think it makes them any less special.
Right.
But I think we almost have to appreciate them for what they were, not wish they were something else.
Exactly. And that goes to the fancy term provenance, which basically is the history of this gun. And that's why I've got several in my gun locker. And they're some of my most prized possession. I've written about an old rifle I got, but I've got several other shotguns, and they literally are probably, now under $200 guns, but on in a normal environment, they're $100 guns, but I wouldn't trade anything for them because I know they've come down through the family on both sides of my family. And to me, that's the cool part. If you're just looking for a gun to go hunting, if that's all you got, that's fine. But I wouldn't buy one from the gun shop just for that. It's the history that comes with it.
I think an interesting game for somebody to play is, if you don't have a lot of money, but you like guns and you like to do something interesting, is you jump online, like to that website that you're talking about that has all those listings. And I know there are other websites, and God forbid they're actually books. I have some in my library. And what they do is that they say, if your gun is marked this, JF Daly and Company, well, it really was made by whatever the parent company was. And I know sometimes they were actually multiple brands. So you could get the exact same shotgun that might have 25 different brand names on it. But what I think might be interesting is arm yourself with your smartphone and these websites hot linked. And then as you look in gun stores, really check out some of these old shotguns, because actually some of them were pretty nice.
Oh, yeah.
And if you see one that's in decent condition, it'd be interesting to be able to do a little bit of history and find out and say, hey, you know what? This is actually a French shotgun that was brought in 1905 that was sold by hardware stores, in New York, right? And I think it would ultimately make an interesting collection, because you would be able to paint a lot of history, pretty affordably.
It's funny you say that, and maybe I'm shaming our ace staff of writers here, but I've pitched this exact same idea to several of our writers, and they all kind of give it the, that'd be nice. That'd be a story to write. I think it's fascinating, but I suppose when you're used to dealing with the latest and greatest, or the most historical and worth a lot, a $25 shotgun that was sold at Montgomery Ward doesn't really trip your trigger. But I'm telling you guys, I'm speaking directly to our writing core right now. I want somebody to do this story. I think it'd be fascinating.
I agree. The allure of the hardware store shotgun. I confess I still fall victim to it or am prey to it in the sense that I'll walk into Brandon's gun store here, and he always has 4 or 5 or 6 of those kind of broken guns, you know, over down in the used shotgun section. I'm always magnetically drawn to them for some reason. And you pick them up and you can see the farm repair splintered wrist,
the
with
baling wire
and driven it. Yeah. Baling wire wrapped around it. And you see a painted shotgun that somebody painted with house paint one time or something like that. But they all reek of a story. And they like, when I pick one up, they start this continuous loop videotape in my mind of because if you shoulder it, you'll maybe smell a faint odor of a cigar. Yeah. Right. Or, an old Hoppy's number 9 smell, and I remember I opened one up and it had a cobweb and there were some little pieces of corn caught in the cobweb in the bore. Wow. And I thought, well, this was probably stored in the barn, I would say, but one thing that I like about them is the fact that you can kind of fix them with a rock and a piece of baling wire. Yeah. And if you go to a company like Numerich Arms or, the gun parts company, Jack First Gun Store, some other places, they have these generic hardware store shotgun parts. And it's really interesting. It's not too long ago, as a matter of fact, I bought a bag of assorted hardware store shotgun screws. And it was like $12, right? Yeah. And so what they do is as they get these guns, because they buy collections from people and junk guns and stuff like that, they'll completely disassemble them and they'll throw all the hammers in a pile and all the screws in another pile. And then you get a scoop of gun screws in a bag for your money. And but what that means, though, is that the vast majority of these old guns are actually fixable. So if you're at your local equivalent of Brandon's neighborhood gun store that I have here, and you find one of these old guns, and it might be missing a hammer, or it might be the trigger action is no good, or maybe the firing pin's gone or something. It's an easy and fun project. And it's a good way to sort of practice a little bit of working on your gun skills.
That was actually on my list of things to talk about, because I've got all these guns here and, some of them are used and I want to do something to them. But I look at Pappy's old shotgun, and I had one that the sear wouldn't engage and all that. It's a little less intimidating to go after that and try to fix it and maybe fail versus something that's really worth a whole bunch of money. And you don't want to have to be the guys we've talked before on the podcast of walking into the gun shop and going, I don't know what I'm doing and I've really screwed this up, and everybody laughs at you. But if you take Pappy's shotgun down and you mess up and don't get the right spring, it's okay. It'll be fine.
Well, it was already broken.
Well, exactly.
And I think people forget something, is that if you don't do anything to it, and it is a family gun, it will continue to get worse and worse and worse. Yep. So the rust will continue to rust. The wood will continue to dry out. The cracks will continue to crack more. And so really, you do the gun and your family a service if you take the time to do a little light restoration to it. Yeah. And just like you say, you take it apart, use your phone video as you take it apart, and that way you can get it back together again. You can use common workbench kind of tools for them. You don't need anything fancy,
because the screws are buggered up anyway.
Yeah, it's buggered up anyway. Needle nose pliers and some Craftsman screwdrivers and you go to work, right? Yep. And chances are good the local Home Depot, which, I was in the other day, I noticed they have a huge selection of drawer after drawer after drawer of specialized fasteners. And there's any kind of size screw you could think of is available there. And, but a little linseed oil on a stock and, some glue to just, fix any cracks, and then a little cold bluing on the barrel. And, maybe even if you just replace the hammers with something that is cosmetic, and even if they don't work, well, you've effectively stopped the aging now. And so now generations of the Johnson family will be able to enjoy old Uncle Fred's shotgun again,
you raised a good point there that cleaning, every time I've ever gotten, well, I call them closet guns. They were put in the closet or, like you said, out in the barn. They're usually filthy because back in the day, whenever that was, a lot of times folks didn't have money for proper cleaning supplies or cleaning solution. So it's the rare gun that ever got cleaned. And if it did, it was probably rag soaked in turpentine. And that was in 1946. So these guns tend to be really dirty, really cruddy, especially in the lock works. I took apart one of these old double barrel shotguns and oh my goodness, that was the main reason the sear wouldn't fall there. I think there was a handful of mud in there. And, of course, it was oil-soaked mud. And the stock, of course, is always oil-soaked generally around the action. But talk a little bit about cleaning some of these, because that's probably the number one thing that they all are going to need, even if you're going to make it a wall hanger.
You know, another really good point about that is take it apart, because sometimes you find treasures. And I'll tell you what, off the top of my head, maybe 15 or 20 times over my life, taking apart old guns like this, you find a note underneath.
Wow.
They're usually under the butt plate. Sometimes they're under the forearm when you take it off.
Really?
Sometimes they can be under a lot of the grips, the pistol grip area of a shotgun. If it has such a thing, it'll have a cap on the bottom.
Yeah.
And if you take them off, a lot of times you'll find penciled something in there, you know, Fred Johnson, 1919, you know,
That's
or
cool.
I've had pieces of old yellowed paper underneath a butt plate, and you take it off and it'll say, you know, this gun belongs to Jeremy Johnson in Roanoke, Virginia, 1917.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, holy cow.
That's so cool.
Suddenly this gun is inhabited, you know, by this guy. And so that's why I think it's really important to take apart that old gun, especially if it's a family heirloom gun, because you never know what's going to be there. But Brent, you're exactly right, is clean it. A lot of these guns were shot with black powder. I think a lot of these guns were never cleaned at all.
Yeah.
You know, they were shot and put back in the barn. And I know, don't be afraid of a bore that looks like a coal mine, because it's surprising. You know, once you get yourself a good stiff brush and some hoppies or something and go to work on it, better yet, get some kid, 10-year-old boy or something, and have him help you with it. You know, he can supply the muscle. They'll love it. And give it a good clean. It's amazing, too, with these wooden stocks. I found spray oven cleaner works wonders on them. And you take it outside, put it on some newspaper, spray, was it Easy Off oven cleaner? You know, that kind of stuff that foams up at it. You spray that on it and just leave it sit out there for 15 minutes or half an hour, and then wipe it off. And it's amazing the grit and grease and just general crap that comes off of it. And do that 2 or 3 times, because most of them are oil soaked, you know, because from the action oil soaked in and it gets all that out. Wow. And then a little, you know, whatever kind of gun oil finish you want to put on it doesn't really matter. And then a little steel wool with some WD-40 around the rest of the gun, and presto. You know, if you want to smear a little cold blue on it, good. If not, let the patina speak for itself.
Yeah.
You know,
that's what I like. These old guns that have, it's turned brown. And it was blued originally, but once it's been there for a long, 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 long time, I love that old brown patina with a little bit of, looks like a nickel shining through, where, you know, it's been worn from, you know, literally tens of thousands of hand touches. And in this case, from my ancestors.
You know, there's a product made in Europe called Ballistol, Ballistol, I think it is. And it was actually made for the German army prior to World War I. And it's a treatment. It's leather, wood, steel, anything. And I actually keep it on my workbench, because when I'm confronted with a cleanup case like that, the first thing I do is I just squirt this Ballistol all over it, because it doesn't hurt anything. And then just let it soak in overnight and go to work with a toothbrush. And sometimes it's amazing what you end up with. It's like, holy cow, look what was there, you know, and there it is. There's another stuff called, I think it's called Evapo-Rust, Evaporust. It comes in a gray plastic jug, and you can get that at like the auto parts store, you know, or Home Depot, I think, has it. And this stuff is a miracle rust remover. So if you really want to de-rust whatever the old gun you have is, just take the stock off and put the whole thing in a little tray of this Evapor-Rust. And it's a water-based, so it's safe. Don't drink it, right? But it's safe. It's not real stinky. And then you leave it set overnight and come out the next day, a little bit of light scrubbing, and the rust is gone. It is amazing. And treat it with WD-40 because it'll rust fast.
Yeah. Well, cleaning also goes along with, what are some pointers if somebody's got an old shotgun? I know my technique, and it's probably not real good, which is you load the gun with a mild type of load, and then you hold it down at your hip and you pull the trigger a couple times, and you find out if the bolt comes flying back or, it's blowing hot gases, out around the action, or whatever. But, and if I had to guess, that's probably how most of us check them. But what are some of the things you do to safety check these old guns to make sure you can actually shoot them versus, again, just hanging them over the fireplace?
Well, most of them are not shootable. And, many of them, if not most of them, have Damascus barrels.
Right. And
you just cannot shoot them with modern smokeless powder. And even most of them you can't shoot with black powder anymore because they deteriorate. They corrode microscopically in all the wraps of Damascus. And so now a lot of the barrels had a Damascus print on them. So they look like they're Damascus, but they might not be. You have to really know what you're looking for. And I would say don't shoot most of these old shotguns. So just clean it up, do what we were talking about, hang it up on a deer antler gun rack, above the fireplace and enjoy it for what it is. If you have one that you think is in good enough condition that you would like to seriously think about shooting it, you really have to seek a professional's help because there's a whole litany of things that you have to be careful with. But first of all, there were 2.5-inch chambers generally. And modern shotgun ammunition is 2 3/4 inch. Right. And so if you stuff a 2 3/4 inch, shotgun shell in a 2.5-inch chamber, which you could because they get worn, but now you're going to have a pressure spike. And so not counting the fact it's modern ammunition in this, 100-year-old shotgun. So there's a lot of variables. And if you really want to shoot one of those guns, you really have to learn how to do it. And it might require you to either buy, black powder loads that are appropriate for the gun or learn to load black powder shotgun shells, which are easy. I mean, you can do that. It's not a bad thing to do. But if you really have a gun that you're determined to shoot, what I usually do is I take it in my backyard here and I've got an old tire that I keep just for this reason. And what you do is you load the gun and then you just tie it to the tire. Yeah. Just lay it across the tire, tie it to the tire, and then run a string and go hide behind an oak tree. I've got this big oak tree right, next to my backyard, and then pull the trigger and see if it blows up. Now, if it doesn't blow up, all that means is that it didn't blow up that time. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So then clean it and put it back up above the fireplace.
And I learned my old 20 gauge. It's a pretty old one. It's 1920, so it's a regular steel barrel, but it's really worn. And I thought, well, let's look at getting it reblued. And most of those old shotguns, even up to World War II, were soft soldered. So you cannot use a hot blue on them. Otherwise, you end up with two shotgun barrels. And it's little tips like that. You really need to find somebody that's used to working on these old guns, especially the old shotguns, because everything was different. The steel was different, the techniques, the way they built stuff. So even though you may have a really competent gunsmith, if they're not familiar with some of these old guns, you can end up doing more harm than good.
I have seen a side-by-side shotgun come apart in a bluing tank.
Oh, really?
Much to the chagrin of both of us.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was like, is that supposed to do that? No, I think you have to use some common sense here. And that is that chances are pretty good. If you come across a beater shotgun like this, it probably is a cheap gun that's not worth anything. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's worth $50 only because if you're willing to pay $50, then the guy will take it. Yeah. And so everything we're saying applies to them. Now, Chances are good, though, if you come across an old shotgun that's in really good shape, I would venture to say it's because the people who owned it knew that it was a really good shotgun and they took care of it.
Right.
You know, I have a Fox Sterlingworth 16 gauge side by side from the really early 30s.
Wow.
And it's beautiful. It's worn, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got a little patina here and there, and but the stock is clean and straight and there's no cracks and it locks up tight and I shoot it. Right. So I think you have to just pay attention to what you're doing. And just because it's this cool old shotgun at that auction that you went to this weekend, just because something's old doesn't mean it's worth any money. I can just look at myself and tell you that, you know, just because I'm old doesn't mean I'm that special.
Yep.
So, but by all means, I think have fun with it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, one final thing kind of on that same note is I was told this by Dwight Van Brunt, who runs Sportsman's Legacy, which auctions gun collections. And he said, again, this provenance is so critical. And he says, even if you don't have really expensive guns, if you've got something you know was your grandpa's or, you know, whatever, you need to build a file on it because you know all about it, but your kids, your grandkids, grandkids, if they do pass it down, they won't know a thing about it. And if the gun is sold, there may be something that happened in the past that makes the gun worth more. So I'm not perfect about this, but he said in everybody's gun safe, you ought to have at least a little file that says, I bought this on such and such. It was, you know, such and such gun. Or in my case, this was owned by my great grandfather. And we know this, it came from Kentucky, and, you know, all the stories you know about that gun, because that's the kind of stuff that even if it's a wall hanger, it would be awfully cool for your descendants to think, well, I remember Grandpa Brent had that and he really thought it was pretty cool.
That's really good advice. And I've bought family heirloom guns from younger family members simply because they didn't feel connected to it because they really didn't know the history of the gun.
Yep.
You know, and I think there's a lot that's missed because of that. And I don't think you get the same feeling like with a skateboard, you know, I mean, maybe, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You know, I got a little bit, I found an old softball mitt that was my dad's from when he was a little boy, you know, like 9 or 10. And that's pretty precious, you know? And so, you know, grandpa's old Stanley plane or something like that. So other things have similar feelings, but well, there's just something about an old firearm. And I think I said it earlier. I said, you pick them up and they start this continuous loop video because they all want to tell you the story.
Yeah.
You know, and they can't help it.
Very cool.
So.
Well, I would say to our readers, go ahead and send us pictures of your family heirloom shotgun. That's always good content that we can use, but frankly, I just want to see them and I'll share them with Roy. So don't forget that's editor@gunsmagazine.com and I can send along any questions you might have for Roy. But yeah, we really want to see those heirloom guns that you guys have got.
Can I add something to that? Guns in family pictures get extra bonus points.
Yeah.
You know?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's why we have so much fun doing this. So keep those cards and letters coming. Let's see those pictures. And I'll give you triple overtime bonus if it's from like pre-1970. I'd like to see great grandpa and the whole clan and, you know, the coon dogs and the whole shooting match. So
wearing knickers.
There you go. And the handlebar mustache. Well, Roy, it's been a great talk. Thank you very much, sir.
You bet. It was a lot of fun.
If you've been around guns for a while, I'm guessing my talk with Roy Huntington stirred a few memories and maybe even a few heartstrings. And with that, I hope you're enjoying the Guns Magazine podcast. Guns Magazine was first in the business, and today we're bringing you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you've got any questions or comments about the show, please email me. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast directory, YouTube, and of course at gunsmagazine.com. And while you're online, don't forget to check out our great sister publications, American Handgunner Magazine at AmericanHandgunner.com, AmericanCop.com, and our numerous special editions, also available on our websites. Most of all, while you're online, I'd also appreciate it if you'd share a favorite episode or some kind words on your own social media channels. I'd also like to thank our new sponsor, Luth-AR. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For the entire staff at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.